Hello and welcome to the Gooner Tour, back in with you guys for another show, coming into your newsfeed faster than David Abraham into a Freiburg manager this evening. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you definitely need to go check out on Twitter what's happened in the Freiburg-Frankfurt game, because it's absolutely hilarious. Thank you ever so much for tuning in, people. We're here to discuss, obviously, what has been once again an amazing weekend of Arsenal football to divulge and chat about, and I'm joined by three fantastic people to help me do so. So let's get straight into things. First off, it's been a while, but Graham Brooks is back. How you doing, mate?
I'm very well, mate. How are you? Nice to be back.
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I mean, other than you knocking over your camera at the start, we're all good.
Good job we weren't live when that happened, wasn't it?
Oh, no, imagine. I mean, there's still hope. There's still time. So maybe we'll see it. Second of all, we've got him back for a bit after he's, recovered from just, I think he's been a bit lazy, Drew, not coming on, mate. How's things?
Hello, Precious. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm very good. It's weird having you and Graham on the same show.
Yeah, I know. We're both never around, are we? So it's good to be back with all of you.
Exactly, yeah. So, people are wondering why the tactical breakdowns. Basically, we've been really busy, all of us, and that's why. But it's really good to have you guys on. And of course, every single week we're trying to get a new debutant on, and I've got an absolutely fantastic one on today, and it's Raph. How you doing, pal?
Yeah, not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Now, I'm a little intrigued, Raph, because you're not only an Arsenal fan but an artist. I mean, I've checked out your latest tune. Sounds very good.
Not a painter. I do music as well, but I'm a musician by day, but an Arsenal fan by night. Unfortunately for myself.
Yeah, it'll be an Arsenal fan for about 5 minutes soon. The way things are going. So, but welcome, Raph. Much appreciate you coming this evening. I'm sure that things are going to go well, a lot better than we saw from the game at the weekend. But it's fantastic, everyone in the chat box this evening. We've got Brian Robles, Vamos Boca, 795 Winston. Loads of you are in there this evening, so thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm sure we'll get to plenty of your comments throughout the show, so let's try and keep things on track. And Graham, I'm going to start with you, mate. It's very easy to ask people their sort of 2-minute reaction like we usually do, but I'm going to do a little bit of a different tact right now, because there's been news that has broken recently thanks to Mr. David Ornstein, the man that knows everything around Arsenal these days. How surprised are you that after the loss to Leicester, that the club have taken the stance that they have at the moment?
Well, first of all, I'd prepared for the 2-minute breakdown. So
we will come to that, mate, but I'm interested in the reaction to this fella.
Yeah, yes, I saw it today. Obviously, when it comes from David Ornstein, there's something in it. All I can say is they're not seeing what we're seeing, Tom. I think that it's become evident over the last few weeks that basically we're going backwards under Emery. I think the cycle that started at the back end of last year has carried into this year, and he's struggling to arrest the slide, no matter what he does. I mean, we saw on Saturday was his sixth formation change in 13 Premier League games. He's struggling, it seems, to get an identity and a structure that suits the players we've got. And as a result of that, basically, we are struggling to create, and we're giving up too many shots. I think the thing is, when you look at the situation now, I honestly believe that the statement that they made, that they saw improvement on Saturday, was basically designed to sort of like give a bit of faith to Emery at this difficult time. Whether that changes in the coming weeks, I don't know. If they were to get rid of him, it would mean not only getting rid of Emery, but getting rid of, I think, all his backroom staff. So it would be a massive change. And really, I think they're looking at who could we bring in. Obviously, people talk about Freddie as an interim manager, no experience. The Mourinho rumours have been sort of flying around. And the buzz last night was about Luis Enrique, who Raul has worked with, obviously, in the past. I think I am surprised, I have to say. They obviously want to come out and give faith in the manager, obviously, to thinking that over the international break. He can work with the players to arrest it, but clearly there's problems there. So I am very surprised by the statement. Obviously, it's one that they put out. They must be aware of the fan base, sort of like the reactions in the fan base. And I think the fans are not silly. They can see what's happening on the pitch. And I'm pretty sure they can see what's happening on the pitch. So whether they think that he can sort of like come through this, I don't know. But I must admit, in answer to your question, I was very surprised by the stance that they took. And they put it out so quickly. So they must be aware of what's being said, not only in the media, but in the fan base.
Drew, I know that you struggle on a daily basis with this Emery regime that's going on about, because I can see it from the anger in your tweets and in our WhatsApp group day by day. So after that result, and don't worry, people, we are going to go into the game in more detail, but I'm really intrigued, Drew, how your sort of mental state is with Emery continuing and seemingly will to continue into the future.
My mental state's fine. And I don't know if people want us to go over the match. I think people have done that enough, but we're going to put ourselves to the ringer just for you guys. But regarding the Emery regime, I don't know. Like, kind of like everybody else, you kind of felt you had to give him his first season. You know, it was always going to be, there's going to be teething issues, growing pains with him whenever there's a managerial change, particularly when you have a managerial change in the wake of someone who was here for 20 plus years and really put his stamp on the club to the point where people say he's the greatest ever to manage, from the touchline for Arsenal. So it's difficult, but there were times last year when you didn't want to seem reactionary, right? But then things were so clear that it just wasn't what it was meant out to be. I kind of point towards that unbeaten run where the results were being garnered, but the performances weren't sustainable in terms of the points we were picking up. And then now all of a sudden, fast forward another year, and all of this data is coming out saying, Unai's first 50 matches was no better than Wenger's last 50 matches. Our XG has dropped, but our goals expected has gone up. We're creating less chances. We're creating fewer shots on goal. Our possession has dropped. I just saw that earlier today that over the last 5 years, from Wenger's last 3 years to Emery's first, year and a half now, our XG has dropped every single season to where now it's at about, it's like 50% of what it used to be or something. So I have to look at it again, but it just shows you that something is not right. And then what it really does is it makes people question, no matter what his CV tells you, if he's the kind of manager that can really go into a big or a bigger club and really take on that responsibility and actually progress them, because there's so much evidence to suggest from his PSG days that he was never going to be able to survive here. And the things that you read about it looking back are the same things that we see going on here. It's the same things that happened at PSG almost to the letter. So really was that, did we do our due diligence in hiring him in the first place? Was he a panic appointment? Was he the panic appointment and it wasn't going to be somebody else? There's a lot, it makes you question a lot of things. And I think you have to look at multiple factors. I think you can question the manager himself. You can question the players in certain aspects. I agree. But you also have to question Raul and Vinay and now Edu. And then again, past that, you then also have to question Josh and KSC. You kind of have to. And I've defended them in certain areas a lot because I see what they do in the United States with some of their franchises they have here. But surely now it's getting to the point where it's hard to defend everything, So I think while my mental state is fine, not a week goes by that I'm not frustrated at what's produced on the pitch. So I can understand that everybody else is maybe even more frustrated than I am. So.
I think that frustration is certainly something that's synonymous with what is becoming an increasing percentage. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the Arseblog poll that he did, and 87% said they would change the manager now. I think those percentages may have crept up a little bit more over the weekend. Raph, as obviously a fan who's, as you say, a diehard Arsenal fan, seeing it week in, week out, and nothing really changing in the progression, not happening as we expected. We changed the manager from Arsene Wenger. You think that we would see some sort of change, but in fact, arguably after that game, statistically, we were 1 point worse off in Emery's first 50 games than Arsene Wenger's last 50 games. Why do you think there is a reluctance from those up in the heavens to make a decision now?
So personally, I think there's a mixture of a couple of things. I think realistically, if you take Emery out now, you've got to think from the Wenger days, we replaced the whole backroom staff. So you're not only going to take away Emery, you're going to take all of his backroom staff, or you're going to keep them there, and they may be, you know, disheartened because it seems like people that he works with in all of his roles. So I think it's not only that the fact that would dislodge and upset the harmony of the whole backroom staff. I think you've also got to look at the money aspect as well. So you're not only going to have to pay off Emery, you're going to have to pay off his staff. Then if you bring in Ljungberg, if you let it, just say, for example, Freddie does step up and do it, who's going to be the backroom staff? Does he have experience picking a backroom staff? Are we going to go in and take some of the staff from the youth teams? Does he have people that he knows? He's never done a role before at this magnitude. So there's so many variables that they would have to look at from that standpoint. Also, I think they may be looking at it realistically. If they sack Emery, pay off his compensation, pay off his whole backroom staff, and then we don't get top four anyway, then realistically they've wasted money. Ultimately would have been the same result if they had kept him. We know obviously in the summer he's going to he's able to go and they don't have to pay him. So I think these things are all in play. And I also think with the Arsenal fan base, it's a good and a bad thing in regards to how we are. But I think the overzealous nature of, or the, how can I put it, the way that fans are perceived, it's easy to kind of dig your heels in and say, oh, fans don't know what they're talking about, or fans kind of are outraged at any bad result, and you can dig your heels in, and sometimes it makes you lose sight from what's actually happening. And the reality is, in every area of our team, we're worse. So defensively, we're worse. We concede more shots. We concede more chances that are created. Attackingly, we don't create nearly as much chances. We don't have as many shots on goal. We don't have as many shots on target. We don't score as many goals. So it's pretty damning and it's pretty obvious. And I'd say lastly, it's an admission that they got it wrong. So it's easier to dig your heels in and say he can turn it around, and then they can look like geniuses, or, you know, they sack him and it's like, you know, it's the first appointment post Wenger that they've got wrong, and then they're in a lot more pressure. They're under a lot more pressure than maybe they would be if it was going well. But I think that this is a defining moment for them as a board. To be honest, they've been shielded a lot by Wenger. They did well in the transfer window, in my opinion. But I think that this is a time when they have to actually show that, are they proactive? Can they see things going wrong and change it? And what are they going to do? Because it's clearly not going right. And I just think this is a defining moment for them. Yeah, no, I can't disagree with what you're saying. I think that when it is talking about that moment, and when that moment, we all sort of realise that moment is probably now for most of us. But I'm going to go into it a little bit more depth later on in the show, but after we've covered the Leicester game in a bit of detail. But it is that why not now, and what is the sort of the reasoning and the real motive behind sticking with him beyond the point of what common sense suggests it should be. Graham, let's focus on into the game then. 2-0 against Leicester. Arsenal are a team in disarray at the moment. Before going into the game, Arsenal were a side that didn't look like they would get anything at the King Power. In fact, we went into the game and most people consider us as underdogs in this game. So, considering the reaction was so sort of angry and exaggerated in some senses, are you actually too surprised about the result that we saw on Saturday?
Well, I think Leicester went into the game as favourites, and there's a reason for that, because they've got a very settled side. They play a 4-1-4-1. The players know their roles, and Rodgers has got them with a structure and identity, and that's completely different to what Arsenal have at the moment. I tweeted out last week, Arsenal have gone from a manager who never worried about the opposition and played to our strengths to the complete opposite. A manager so worried about the opposition's strengths that he's suffocating our players and the quality of our players and not playing to our strengths. And that's what I thought how it played out on Saturday. He flipped Tom to a 3-4-1-2. I think he did that because he was worried about Jamie Vardy's pace in behind. And I think the problem is when you're playing against a team who are so well structured, so well settled in a formation, and you're changing basically to your 6th change in 13 Premier League matches, you have to ask the question, do the players honestly believe in what they're doing? How can they keep changing from one system to another? I think one thing that teams who have a basic understanding of their roles week to week, in a basic structure, if you do the same thing week in, week out, it becomes like habit. And I think when you're struggling, as Arsenal have been lately, to create, and we're struggling in the fact, as we've said, that we're giving up too many shots, I think you have to go back to what you know well, the basics. And I think that this club has been built on a 4-2-3-1 sort of formation. I think we got the players to play that formation. He started off this season in pre-season playing in that formation. So I think the fact that we keep flipping formations must be confusing to the players. And I honestly ask the question, do they believe it? His plan Saturday was basically to give Leicester, the centre-halves, the ball, I thought. We sat off them. We played Lacazette and Aubameyang as split strikers, and that their role was mainly to sort of like stop the ball going out to the fullbacks in their build-up. So they played through the middle. Then I think he asked Guendouzi and Torreira, who were like in the 2, in the 4, to sort of like try and shut down Tielemans and Maddison, their most creative players. And then I think he asked our wing-backs, Kolasinac and Bellerin, to almost like try and sort of like match up with their wide forwards. It worked reasonably well, I thought, for 60 minutes. I thought we played better than we had been playing. We looked totally better in a shape, you could argue, more compact maybe at times, but there were still things where it wasn't working, I thought. And what Leicester did quite cleverly, Tom, I don't know if you noticed, but although we did stop the ball going out to the fullbacks were still getting forward. They were sort of like they're a lot faster than us, Leicester, a lot more physical than us. And I think the thing is, I watched Wolves at the Emirates last week when Wolves played. They know how to play that 3-4-3 system where they play 3-4-3 going forward, but they dropped us almost like a 4-5-1 out of possession. So they're back covering all the bases. That we didn't do that so well. I thought Kolasinac did a reasonable job of it. They obviously targeted that side and got some 2-by-1 situations. And a couple of times they flashed balls across our box, which we defended. Chambers did well to get out. Well, I thought we were slightly fortunate. They should have had a penalty when Guendouzi clearly had a tug on their Turkish centre-half. So that was his plan. And I think he had a plan to hold them. But with Emery, there's always a plan to hold, but there's no plan to retrieve it if it goes wrong. And I think it's quite damning that we didn't have a shot on target after the first 53 minutes. I think there were still problems in the structure. We struggled to pass forward. There's a lack of movement, I think, in front of our centre halves, our ball playing centre halves, and that's why I think when I looked at the pitch maps or the heat maps, they were passing a lot sideways on Saturday because there was no movement in front, and so that clearly is a shape that if they worked on it, they certainly didn't work how to progress through the middle of the park, and that's one of the sort of like problems with an Emery team. I think we do struggle to progress through the middle of the park. We have been relying on wide players, fullbacks to get up high and for cutbacks and for crosses, but we don't go through the middle of the pitch, even with Ozil in the pitch. It was a strange sort of formation, wasn't it? Lacazette and Aubameyang, who clearly weren't on their game on Saturday, I think, because of the roles they were asked to play. Ozil sort of like flitting around the pitch. He was in behind the strikers, almost like a false 9 at times. But I was very disappointed with the goal we conceded, Tom, the way we switched off for that goal. Guendouzi, I thought, switched off, didn't go with his runner. And then I thought that Bellerin, who was in a good position to defend the situation, rushed out towards the ball, and Chambers sort of like allowed Vardy to peel off him. And of course, they scored a goal that a lot of people are saying a very Arsenal-like goal, but I think we could have defended it better. I know as the game goes on, for sort of like you're talking about 60 minutes, minds get a bit frazzled as the game's going on. You get tired mentally. And I think that after that, we just didn't respond. And then they got a second, and that virtually killed the game. So overall, I think that although there were signs, more encouraging signs in the fact that we were slightly more compact in this shape, I still didn't think it sort of like worked. And I thought Leicester, as I said, were a lot more physical than us, a lot more speedier to the ball than us. And I'll just close with this one thought, right? And I've always said that when you play forwards away from home, when you play two forwards, Tom, I think we lack what I would call control in the middle of the park, because basically we haven't got what they had, what we lack, and that's Ndidi. So if you have a physical, imposing central midfielder who's able to do what he does in a game, that gives you, I think, a bit of strength off the ball when you play two forwards. So when you lose the ball, if we'd played, I was thinking if we had two quality defensive midfielders, and we had a speedy centre half, someone who's good on recoveries, I think then we could play Lacazette and Aubameyang in a two, even Ozil as well in a team. When we haven't got two quality central midfielders who are physical and are good at tackling and recover the ball, and we haven't got a pacey centre half, I think that we're vulnerable, and that's why we struggle. I think the players away from home have got a mentality now where they quickly know when it goes wrong, it's not going to be put right. And I think they're so used to it on the road now. The team is very fragile mentally away from home.
Yeah, it is. I think the things that I picked out from what you said there, the Ozil splitting thing is really irritating, because I thought finally we're playing Ozil in behind two very, very capable strikers. Lacazette is very good at holding the ball up. Aubameyang is very good in getting in behind. And yet, like you said, Ozil sort of played this false nine role, which meant that Aubameyang was pushed out really far wide, which we know Leicester can deal with really, really well. And Lacazette was always sort of, actually, I found Lacazette in our own half way more than he should have been for a striker. Yeah. And like, I get that he plays a centre forward role if we play him in the 4-3-3, and that means he drops back more instinctually. But playing as an out-and-out striker in a two, he shouldn't be dropping back that much and allowing Ozil to actually play that role to sort of connect the midfield to the forward line. The lacking in control, I think, also comes down to the fact that Torreira still just isn't sure of the role that Emery really wants him to play, which is frustrating, because when we signed him at Sampdoria and for Uruguay, he knew exactly what his role, knows exactly what his role is still in the national side. He's the ball winner, he's a little terrier, he's a nuisance at the base of that midfield, and he's just been asked to do a different job. And then when he's actually played in sort of a pivot with Guendouzi, which he can still play in sort of the deeper player of those two, he's so confused and sort of in two minds about what he should and shouldn't be doing now that it's sort of being detrimental to the Uruguayans' game. Drew, when it comes to actually the system, and Graham touched on this, I was surprised that we did go with the back three, but I think it frustrates a lot of people to think that we're meant to be the bigger side and we're going to Leicester playing as the side that is going to look to try and hit on the counter, the side that is going to basically be more passive, as we use that word over and over again under Unai Emery. And Graham brought up the point that actually we're a team that just sort of allows oppositions to play. We worry about the opposition way more than we worry about our own quality. Is that Emery's biggest downfall, that he tactically changes things too much and he worries about the opposition too much? Or is there something else that's going wrong?
No, I think that's it. And you saw that in two specific instances. In his last season at Sevilla, when he didn't win a single away match, that rings true. That he's so worried about trying to counter what they're going to do at their ground that he kind of shoots himself in the foot. And then you saw it with that spectacular collapse against Barcelona in Champions League with PSG. Same thing again. He against a side who at the Nou Camp are a different animal. He's allowed them to play their game. And he's allowed them to freely go in and say, we have nothing to lose. We have to attack for 90 minutes because we have to get back into the match and we're not going to give in. And he allowed it to happen. So for me, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. And again, we've seen those same trends carry over to us, even dating back to last season. And then so I think for me, that's not the mentality you need for a club who, with all respect to us, we're not at the level where we feel we should be. But we are still a club more than capable, particularly when you look at the quality across the first team, that we should be in a much higher level than where we are now. We might not be winning the Premier League every year, we might not be winning the Premier League at all, but we should still be competitive. And given the nature of the team, even with the 1 or 2 areas we can deal with improvement for sure, we still should be comfortably sitting in third, even if we're 6 or 9 points off of City and Liverpool. We shouldn't be flirting with the fact that after next week we could be sitting in 10th. And you can speak to the quality of the Premier League, that it's very, very close when you look past maybe the top 3, but we're just not effectively getting results and our players aren't being used effectively. And you see that in multiple areas. It's not just in midfield anymore. The issue should be the midfield balance. That was the one thing we always used to gripe about, right? Now it's become what we're doing at the back. Now it's become how do we best get, the best form regularly out of our attacking players. When you have a team that is comprised of the likes of Mesut Ozil, Aubameyang, Lacazette, players of that ilk, and you have 2 shots on target in your last 2 matches, it's indicative of this. Everything systemically from back to front is off, and it's just not working. And I was livid when I saw the back 3. And I said on multiple podcasts that I guarantee we'll be going with the back 3 against Leicester. You saw it coming. But the issue is that when you go with the back 3 and then you only play 2 in midfield, how can you possibly look to sit deep and look to spring quick counterattacks when you surrender the midfield? Against Leicester, who are going to use 3 in midfield. When Ndidi's going to sit. Tielemans, and that Madison are going to find joy. And if it wasn't going to be Madison centrally, it was going to be Madison out instead of Barnes. It was going to be Dennis Praet in the middle for him instead. Either way, either of those midfield combinations have more than enough about them to run us over from 1 to 90. And in fairness, they absolutely did. We didn't have a chance in midfield against Leicester. If we already give up our chances of winning the midfield battle, you can't expect to go to Leicester, a team in this kind of form, and get a result. Against any halfway decent side, you're never going to get a result. But then how can I sit here and see this? How can you sit there and see this? Graham and Raph and every other fan, how can we sit here and see this? But so for some strange reason, Emery seems to struggle with this concept. To me, that's what frustrates me probably more than anything. I'm saying I have a lot of coaching experience and I have playing experience, but I'm not a professional manager still and yet.
Sign him up.
But if I can still see these things, how can a professional manager? How can he not?
Yeah.
It's
not even that. I'm not someone with any coaching. I mean,
and you can still see it.
Good for you.
Yeah,
I can see it.
But it's not even about that. It's about just being able to analyze and read the game. It's not even about coaching experience. That's just the added bonus. If you can read the game on any sort of level, you can like scroll through every Twitter line you want. Everyone said the exact same things pre Leicester a couple days before. And when the lineups were released, roughly everybody I know had the same exact reaction. You included, Graham included, everyone in the WhatsApp chat included. We all said the exact same things, and those exact same things transpired on the pitch 1 to 90. I grant, and I agree with Graham, that I think the overall performance was probably better than we saw in matches before. I think we were certainly better against Leicester than we played against Victoria. I would say that for sure. I think the level was raised, but again, we used our better players. So naturally, you would expect when you're close to your first choice 11 is playing, you want the level of output to be, a little bit higher. So it was good that we saw that. But it still wasn't even remotely good enough. We still registered 1 shot on frame all match long. We didn't have a single shot after the 53rd minute. And again, for the types of players we have at this club, that's just not even in the same stratosphere of good enough. So for me, that's where the frustration is. That's the source of it. I think it's the source of it for all of us. And now it's even being exacerbated by the fact that it seems like leadership isn't making what seems to be the right decision. And then all we can do is question it and hope that it works out one way or another, and then kind of sit on our hands and hope for the best.
Raph, I want to play devil's advocate for a second. Graham brought up the fact that playing the 3 at the back meant that it was sort of tackling the Vardy problem of letting him get in behind. Drew brought up the fact that it was very obvious that we could see that this was going to be the lineup that we were going to play. But is there an argument to say that it was obvious because actually, if you think about it, it's the right choice in a way, because whilst we play very, very different tactics against different teams, we are coming up against a Leicester side which has done very, very well. Has got a lot of attacking players and players that are really on top form. Playing with a back 3, which arguably made David Luiz, I thought, had a really, really decent game, in fact, and made him look a lot better. Was it actually the right decision? And the argument that came from David Ornstein's Athletic article, where he mentioned that the board sort of had sympathy for the fixture because of how much they say we actually dominated the game before that sort of sucker punch of a Vardy goal. How much do you sort of agree that the system that we played in terms of a back 3 was either the right decision, or are you wholly against it, saying that we're Arsenal, we should go out there with a more attacking lineup and go to play against Leicester?
Personally, I'm more on the second. I understood watching the game, I could get an understanding from a structural perspective that we were trying to hold out and we were trying to contain Leicester. But I guess it goes back to what the guys have been saying. Like, we are Arsenal, and with respect to Leicester, because and obviously there's no divine right that we have to be the more attacking team and we're a better team just because we're a bigger team, like history wise. But if you look at our players, the way that we set up and the players that we actually have, we're not defensively a good team. We don't defend well. We're always liable to mistakes, whether that be from midfield, losing a ball, whether it be from defense. You look at David Luiz, you look at Holding, and I'm a big fan of Holding, but he's susceptible to the odd lapse of concentration. So is Chambers. So the reality is, for me, is and it wouldn't be something that would win the league, but I think we just need to try and attack as opposed to defend, because I just don't think it works. I don't think that we can be a team that defends and tries to get a 1-0 lead and hold on to it. And I think by our results, it's just shown that simply doesn't work. I mean, we don't keep clean sheets. If you look at Leicester, for example, Leicester's strength, in my opinion, Vardy aside, is their midfield. They probably got one of the best midfield tandems in the league in regards to Ndidi, Tielemans and Maddison. And I think by playing two in the midfield and making Ozil play effectively as a false nine and then splitting the strikers to offset the wing backs, what it did is not only it gave up the midfield, but when we actually won the ball back, Ozil's not someone that can play in behind. He's always going to play to feet. And then because Aubameyang and Lacazette was so wide, he didn't actually have anyone he could really link up with great effect. Great effect. And then you had it kind of stifles Bellerin and Kolasinac a little bit, because Aubameyang and Lacazette are almost taking up spaces and having to run into other spaces in order to try and find some space. By that time, Leicester are able to come back and get in position, because with all the reality is, with all the pressure that we had, we didn't actually create that much. Like, I mean, we were better, and we offset some of their attacking threats, but we didn't create loads. They weren't reeling at any point in the game. I didn't feel like we were so dominant that the board should say that that they could see us, I don't know, like so much better than Leicester were. I think that we got ourselves back in the game as opposed to dominating the game. And I just think with the players that we've got, we're in a position to do so. I think we set up the team completely wrong, in my opinion, to win the game. I think we set up to try and stop Leicester from winning the game. And I just think with our personnel, it's just never going to work. And I think that's why when we go 1-0 down, the players look so dejected, because it looks like they spent they spent 60 minutes basically trying to stay in the game until they're in a position to maybe, I don't know, pick them off with one chance here and there or something like that. And when the Aubameyang goal was ruled offside, it was like that was the moment that was going to allow us to kind of hang on to the game. I think that we should play, like Graham said, with a defensive midfield axis to make Torreira's job be disciplined, make Guendouzi be slightly more attack-minded than Torreira, but still have that defensive discipline. And then you allow Ozil to do what he does best, which is create, and you play with Pepe and Aubameyang, and you have genuine pace that actually scares the opposition. I mean, the reality is Evans and Sionku weren't really tested. Like, let's be honest, in terms of how they were playing, there wasn't that much movement that allowed them to see whether or not they're actually as good as their stats suggest. And I think that's the main issue with Emery for me. He cares so much about the opposition that it stifles our strengths. And our strength this season, to be honest, when I saw our team this season, after we bought David Luiz, I just thought realistically we're going to have a lot of exciting games where we score more than the opposition. And that's the way that we're going to win games. Because of Emery's defensive mindset, and because of his complete lack of offensive. I guess because he's so pragmatic in the way that he says, and I don't even know if he's pragmatic because we don't even defend well. But because his reluctance to not go forward and his reluctance to not be an offensive manager and to try and work out what the opposition are going to do, I think it just stifles what we are good at, and I guess, highlights what we're bad at, which is trying to be defensively solid, but then we're not creating any chances. So I just think it was wrong on all counts, and I think it's a systemic thing. I think it's always going to happen because ultimately he cares too much about the opposition, and he's stifling what we actually are good at, which is attacking and creating chances. Well, what we should be good at.
Good point, Raph.
It is a good point. I think, and I want to talk. And Graham, I'm actually going to throw up on the screen, leading on from Raph's point now about the chance creation and what we're doing, because we are harming ourselves with how we're playing. And on the screen, you should be able to see these are the passes that Leicester played in the game, and you can see that whilst yes, there is some utilisation of the wings, you can see how much centrally they're trying to attack us as well. And that probably was in part forced by the fact that we played with wing backs, which sort of limited how much they could do in the wider areas. But still, the amount of passes into the box is so frequent in comparison to our own. Now, I'll show you ours. This is ours. Now, we hardly even got down. If you look at the left flank, we hardly even got down that side. And you'd think that Kolasinac is someone who we used to say could never really play as a left back, as a fullback, a solid fullback, and only can play as a wing back. For someone that we said that about previously, that it's concerning that we weren't doing enough down that side. Bellerin was a lot more positive on the right-hand side, and you can see that. But again, it's the lack of passes, sort of dangerous passes into the box, and the lack of key passes into the box compared to our opponents, the amount of chances that we let up, that I think is being our downfall. Graham, how do you interpret those stats, and what do you think needs to change, whether it's under Emery or another manager, to sort of get the best out of this team?
Well, how I interpret those stats is what I said when I talked about it in the breakdown, and that is that they were able, because of the structure of their side, to get their fullbacks bombing on. Their wide forwards were dragging our players inside to create the space for Pereira and Chilwell in wide areas to get crosses into our box, and that's been a feature of their play all season, and he didn't nullify that. I think that we had a problem in, first of all, I will say that we had, first of all, a shout out to Archie in the chat, who says that we're playing gripped by fear. And I think that's a really good thing to say. We are playing as though we're gripped by fear. But coming back to your point, this system that he plays, he's always relied heavily on wing backs and full backs to get the crosses in. We don't play centrally through the pitch anymore. They were able to create the overloads going forward because they've got wide forwards who come inside. In fact, what Emery's teams used to do last year. Wide forwards coming inside, creating gaps for fullbacks to get forward and put crosses in. We didn't get enough people up front to support all the time, because I think the system we played, we had those three centre backs taking care of Vardy. That's three centre backs taking care of Vardy. That's what he went for. And when you commit heavily in that area, you lessen in the centre of the pitch, don't you? Unless a centre back is going to move forward. I think you rely on that system for someone to step out and pass forward quickly, so that you can play through the centre of the pitch, and then when you get control of the ball, to get your wing backs high, to get the crosses in, and hopefully Lacazette and Aubameyang to get in the middle on the end of it. But we didn't do that, and I think that Drew made a good point. I think that Leicester always had the extra man in midfield, and as a result of that, he set us up really just to try and nullify their midfield with Guendouzi and Torreira. But I just think they passed around us very easily to create those openings that your pitch map showed, to get people in wide areas to get crosses in. We didn't get enough people forward, and the wing backs a lot of the time were having to come back in defensive areas to try and where they were controlling the midfield, they were pushed back. And I think sometimes they had us playing in the area of the pitch where we didn't want to be. How would we change that? We bought a £72 million winger in the summer, and he's on the bench. And now I can't for the life of me understand what Emery's done here, because I know he hasn't exactly set the world on fire, but in those last two games, he scored 2 free kicks in the Europa League that sort of got him up and running. And then I thought he played really well. And the one thing he's good at is we see it, and we've become almost like a set piece team lately. And his delivery from corners and from set plays has been exemplary, right? So how are we going to change that? I think we need to go back to a 4-2-3-1. That's how we're going to change it. Go back to getting as Raph said, a pivot in front of the back four, 2 players a DM plus a ball progressor in that area. And then we have 2 wide players, and we have someone central behind 2 strikers. But those 2 DMs have got to be people who hold their position, Tom. And that is where, at the moment, when he plays, Torreira is the one who played at the base of a diamond for Sampdoria, as you know. He's playing him forward to press, so he's playing him out of position. I think we've got to get back to basics, the things that work. These players are comfortable. These players are, you need to find a system that makes these players look better. These players are better than they're shown on the pitch, Tom. That's what I will say.
No, they are. They are a lot better than that. And then people are saying that in the chat about the criticism of specific players. Guendouzi's come in for some criticism. I think that he's certainly declined, as he had a really fantastic start to the season, but has now gone downhill. I think that Lacazette is looking a completely different player to what he looks disinterested. He's not got as committed. Go on, Graham. You sound like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that one thing with Guendouzi you got to bear in mind, Tom, is he's only 20 years old, and young players are always going to be inconsistent. I think there are games when he plays on the edge a lot of the times. Guendouzi, when he's angry, he's a better player, and I think he's somebody who's the last 2 games his passing has been poor. That's one thing actually I didn't touch on when we talked about the game. We were vulnerable to transitions in that first half because our passing in those areas was poor in front of our defence. And on a better day, they could have got in.
You can see Lacazette
away from home isn't the same player as he is at home, is he?
No, but you can see from the amount of red in our own half from that stat of how many passes we were giving away. Now, there's always that constant argument, Drew, I'll come on to you with this. There's always the constant argument that whether it's movement or whether it's just simply poor quality, I personally fall on the side that we don't move enough as a side and create enough space and enough options for our midfielders and our defenders that we end up panicking and giving the ball away quickly. We also put ourselves under pressure from this goal kick system that we keep trying. What is it as simple as saying that our players just need to move more, or is it down to confidence? What is the key issue in terms of playing out from the back? And that's clearly the style that, even though we say what is Emery's style, his style is very clearly that he wants to play out from the back. But we put ourselves under so much pressure in the way that we're trying to do it that it's becoming impossible.
Yeah, just being. I mean, you can't play a sport like football and be tactically static. It just doesn't work. Especially when you're trying to play out of the back, there's got to be options, and they can't just be standing still and waiting for the possession. It's just we've always been, and again, this is something that's dated back to maybe the last couple of years under Wenger, that we've just been so easy to mark when we're trying to build possession because players just don't really make themselves available. And to be frank, it's everybody. You even see something. There's a lot of times Mesut Ozil doesn't make us available. Aubameyang, same thing. A lot of the players just when things are going wrong, they have the inverse reaction that you want to see. Instead of them working harder to create space for not just themselves, but for others, they do the opposite. And it's just more of like hanging my head and just kind of almost like saying, what's the point? But that's the thing. Again, this issue doesn't really rear its ugly head against teams that don't press well. Against Leicester, who do press well, who are organized, who do know how to control the middle third of the pitch, it becomes evident and glaring. And I think you saw that multiple times against them. Against Vitoria, it's one thing where they gave us plenty of space and time to operate, and maybe against some other sides who prefer to sit deep. But against any modern side that has any semblance of a progressive manager who want to be progressive with the ball and they want to defend the right way without it, our system in its current iteration is not going to work. But again, we don't give ourselves the opportunity for it to work when you do things like making awkward tactical decisions. I grant you that maybe playing with 3 out of the back makes it easier to play from the back because you have that extra option through the additional center back in the middle. You have your wing backs can sit out wide, your 2 center middles can sit deep, then Ozil can link play with the 2 center mids and then potentially the 2 strikers. So you have the options that you may not have if you play a different system for playing out of the back. That's all well and good, but that's not
Drew. Drew, I just think just come in there. I just think that the distances are just too big. They don't suit our players. Basically, Ever since Louise has come, the defence has dropped deeper. So we don't press from the front. That's one reason why the defence has dropped deeper. That is creating a massive space in the middle of the park. The one thing a lot of teams have got, we haven't got, is they've got runners in their midfield, physical runners. Our team is more technical, small space style players. So we have to be more compact to build up through the midfield. So when it's brought out, I think we need to be one touch, two touch, move the ball quickly at pace. There's a lack of moving the ball quickly. There's not enough movement off the ball, but we don't move the ball quickly. The spaces are too big. We get outrun quite easily in games. I've noticed it sitting up high in the stadium where we are. The gaps are too large. We get outrun. Tobias, for example, has picked up an injury in the last week because he's asking him to do a role that doesn't suit his midfield skill set. Let's get back to putting these players in the positions and in a structure that suit their skill sets. But basically, we need to be more compact, and sort of like the distances between the defenders and the strikers needs to be smaller, so we can build up using our technical skill. Our players are not physical players who basically, and they're not people that can run like some other teams can. We're not like a Liverpool, are we? And also, we don't. I think the other point I want to make is watching Liverpool, the way they work off the ball. I've always said this: Arsenal are on the ball team, not an off the ball team, and I just think the players don't respect that side of the game as well as say. And I think football now is a game. It's all about off the ball transitions, winning the ball high up, and that's what Liverpool are so good at. And that's the way I think we need to go. But at the same time, we need to keep our distances smaller to suit the players we've got.
I agree with one aspect and I disagree with another. I do agree that, and that's something I was trying to build up to, is that when you look at the spacing and you look at the support chains, when you look at how we're building play, it's not there because you have midfielders who can sometimes, or a lot of the time, be like headless chickens, where they're not in positions where they can support their midfield partner, or they can support the forwards further forward and then give them another option. The spacing is wrong. The understanding of how you support and how you build triangles, how you build shapes to build play, that's all off. But I don't agree that we don't have players who don't like to be direct. Aubameyang at his finest is a direct player. Pepe at Lille at his best was a direct player. Mesut Ozil in his best years played for a Real Madrid side that was very, very direct, not based on possession. And you can arguably say the same thing for Lacazette in some certain spells when he played at Lyon, where sometimes they would also be very direct and he would be, one of the ones to kind of start that system off. And then Torreira, again, Uruguay and Sampdoria, also direct teams, and he was way more direct. He would also play a lot of balls that would bypass midfield and put the forwards through. So I think we do have the players to be direct. I think Emery doesn't want to be direct. And I think that's almost kind of like the issue is where we have players. It's almost kind of like Arsene Wenger again. We have players who don't fit what he's trying to achieve. And I think there's some semblance of resistance. It just doesn't work out. But then it's up to the onus is on Unai Emery, instead of trying to force players into a system that probably still isn't going to work. He has to build, given what he has on offer, what's at the club. And
he needs to build a system to suit the players he's got. That's
I agree.
He still hasn't done it.
And he's not. And then we got on the same thing with Arsene Wenger in certain periods, didn't we? For the same exact reasons.
Yeah. It's two managers very intent on trying to force a style when you don't have the personnel.
Niko Kovac just got sacked despite winning the double because the way he wanted to play did not suit the way Bayern brass wanted Bayern to play, the way the Bayern players didn't want to play, and Carlo Ancelotti lost his job for the same reason, or one of the same reasons.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it and say, when you're at a certain level and your club is of a certain size with players of a certain level in your first team, you have to play the right type of football, or they're not going to be happy, and the fans aren't going to be happy. And with all due respect, thanks, Ben. Sure. And I think that's why you look at it, and Tom brought it up, and I think we can all agree that you see Lacazette is not happy. And I think it's clear that there's a few reasons, but it's obvious that I don't think he is happy with how we're playing. I think you even see it with Aubameyang. He's not as necessarily as cheerful as he normally is on the pitch, and you can see that even he's beginning to get frustrated with how things are transpiring. I don't think that there are only two. You see it on a lot of the players. So it's clear everything is just wrong on the tactics board. And instead of trying to force feed it to the players, Emery has to do what it takes, and he has to seed this one. He has to say, you know what, in order for progression and for the sake of getting the best out of the players, I might have to be the one to make the concessions to make things work. It's not going to be, they're not going to be forced into it. That's clear. That's been made clear this entire season. So,
Yeah, no, I do. Go on, Raph.
No, I was gonna say, just to cut you. It's ironic because that's kind of how he lost the dressing room at PSG as well.
That's right. Yeah.
He tried to force feed a formation onto them, and the players kind of grouped together and just said, it doesn't suit us. We're not going to play that way. And that's when he lost the league. And I don't think it's coincidence that he's the only manager since PSG got money effectively. He's the only manager that didn't win the league. And I think it was at that time when he was trying to input a style on them that was never going to work. And I think one of the main things where he's fallen down, firstly, I think he's a really good interview. He must be, because I think the way that the way he goes about and the way he talks initially, it's very much based around, I'd rather win 5-4. I want to be proactive. I want to be the protagonist. But then it doesn't really show or reflect in the way that he actually plays. And I think one of the main reasons is an overload of information. I know a lot of people talk about the language, and I do think the language is a barrier, not just because of the fact that he doesn't speak the best English, but I think it's an overload of information when you don't speak the best English. And he's not a manager that's based around being free flow and maybe a Wenger type that lets you play, lets you express yourself. He seems like you can see him on a touchline almost signaling exactly where he wants people to be at all times. And when you overload some players with that information and that doesn't suit them, especially creative players. If you look at Ben Arthur, for example, who's probably not the best example because he does cause trouble sometimes where he goes, but a player that maybe expresses himself, an Ozil, even a Verratti to extent, Neymar, who it's players that maybe might do something slightly off the cuff, and there's freedom within a framework, as it were, in terms of, there's a structure in place, but they may do some things that allow them, it may not be exactly what you want, but it allows you to have space in order to create chances. And I think that overload of information and that barrier, I think, coincides with the fact that he struggled when he's gone abroad, when he's gone away from Spain, Sevilla and Valencia were his best roles. Whereas PSG, Spartak Moscow and Arsenal, he struggled in certain areas to impact his ideas and impact his philosophy on the team and actually be successful at it. So I think there's just a lot in regards to how he operates, and maybe, the hours and hours of videos, the overload of information, all of those things don't work when there's some sort of barrier in regards to maybe getting that information across. You can even see it as an example when Saka was speaking, and he probably didn't even mean to, but he said that he leans a lot on Freddie to get kind of the information across because he doesn't really understand everything that
I didn't see that. Is that what he said?
Yeah, he said it in one of the interviews, and I think, bless him, obviously he's probably not even realised that it's as damning as it is. But the reality is, if the information isn't being put across as effectively as it can be, then there's always going to be errors and problems in the team.
Just real fast, I want to build on something that Raph just said. So a lot of people are talking about, rightly or wrongly, about Erik ten Hag becoming the new manager at Arsenal. And if you look at it, Ajax is the prime example that for decades have instilled one system in their team throughout the youth ranks and then throughout the first team. It's 4-3-3. They have that structure. The players know their roles, but within that structural framework, all the players in that team have freedom of movement, freedom of decision making. It's just they're not force fed. You have to do this. You have to make this choice in this scenario. And if you don't, you've made a mistake. That's not how it works. And that's the other thing is there's a lot of the ability to do that is made easier by the fact that Ajax youth players play every single position except goalkeeper when they're coming through the ranks. When they're in the defensive third of the pitch, they have a bit better of awareness to make certain decisions in certain scenarios that maybe another player who hasn't been brought up in that same system, or most Dutch systems, to be fair, they don't have that. But that's why a system like that can work.
So you can see why Frankie de Jong is so good.
There's a reason why. For example, De Ligt played center forward and center mid when he was coming through the youth ranks.
Yeah.
So he has the ability to pick the ball up as a center back and say, you know what, I can't make a pass. There's no long ball option available. I'm going to carry possession. And then when something becomes available, I'll make the choice.
When you say about Ten Hag as well, because every single show I do on here, it's a raw reaction, tactical brain interview.
I don't want to hear it. Everyone says,
Ten Hag. Yeah, it is all the time.
Right,
and I'd be interested to see it happen, but there is also always going to be that caveat that the system works so well at Ajax because it is Ajax and because that system is bred into them.
And it's not just that, but Ten Hag is also Dutch. That same system is similarly implemented at other Dutch clubs. It's not just Ajax. They don't run the gambit on how that's done, you know. So
one thing I would say though is, and for rightly or wrongly, Wenger has instilled an identity at Arsenal, and I just think that we shouldn't just deviate completely. Like I hear a lot of fans. Also, you talk about Ten Hag. A lot of fans talk about Mourinho and which I'm completely against, because I just think it goes away from what Wenger, and like I said, he's had his flaws, and obviously towards the end we can all agree that it was probably the right time for him to go a couple of years before he did. But I think that style and that identity and that philosophy that is synonymous with Arsenal shouldn't just be thrown away. And I think if you look through through the youth teams, for everything, we play a certain style of football, a brand of football. We bring in players from abroad, as well as some of the youth, the homegrown players play a certain style, and we bring players to suit that style. I just think that we shouldn't deviate from that, and we could instill that La Masia, the Ajax, the Arsenal way, as it were, and have a manager that reflects that, not a manager that I think I don't know if you ever heard something like the 80-20 rule, is that sometimes when you've got something that's 80% and that 20%, you become fixated on that 20%, and you find something and you look for someone that has that 20%, and then you realize that, hold on, where's all the other 80% gone? And it's like, I feel like with Arsenal, we shouldn't get too fixated on, you know, we have to have a tactical manager that can change formations and can do certain things, and just go away from what's kind of been built and instilled in our club for 22 years, effectively.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great. I especially like when you were talking about the overload of information as well earlier on. I constantly say to people, just when they're saying that it can't just be down to the language, and you raising the point about the overload of information earlier on is the perfect example, because for me, yes, it's not good enough excuse to say that it's just his language, because Pochettino came into Southampton and didn't speak a word of English. But the impact on that Southampton team was brilliant. And then he eventually learned English and became even better. And maybe there's an argument to say that Emery hasn't stepped up enough in terms of his trying to improve his communication. But it's not just a simple excuse to say that it's the language, but it is the overload of information. And that was really interesting what you said about Saka and the interview that he had, because I hadn't seen that. And knowing that as well, knowing that Freddie is having more of an influence than we might have thought originally is really intriguing. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to give the chat box an opportunity to ask plenty of questions. So if you have a question now, we're going to have our quick fire. So I know that I've got two of the three boys who, if I had Wayne on, we could go for a 24-hour podcast, I reckon. So just a reminder to keep your answers quick and short and clean. Andy McDonald asked the first one, Graham. He says, do we have a team for the top four? I think we do, or would we just be putting lipstick on a pig by getting in another manager? Is this our biggest problem?
Well, yeah, I agree. We have got a team for the top four. And I think that Emery's overthinking it. As Raph said, he's swamped by data, and the fear that Archie said in the chat. I agree with that. We're playing with fear, and he's swamped by data. So yes, we have got a team for the top four, and I think if we change the manager, got players playing in a structure that suit their skill set, we can yet challenge for a top four place this year. You've got to remember, Tottenham and Man United are still behind us despite this, and Chelsea and Leicester are looking good. But I think we've got some good players in our, as I said, are not playing to their potential. I think we have got a team that is good enough to get in the top four, yes.
Drew Siliv, I hope I pronounced that name right, mate. He says, are you guys losing interest?
I don't think it's losing interest. I think it's just more of, with every week that goes by and there's no change, there's no semblance of actual progression, it's just continual regression. I think it's just increased frustration. I don't think any of us here can say that we're not going to love ourselves as much as we do, and that we're not going to start supporting somebody else. That's not how it works. I think it's hard to focus on the one or two positives that might still exist that you can really try to pick out when everything is just so negative, and it's just frustrating at the minute. So I think that's kind of what it is.
Raph, this sort of question sort of links into something you said just a second ago. Messi JH says, why are you all against Mourinho?
Me personally, I watched something today and it just had all the clips of him saying, cussing Arsenal basically. And it just sent chills down my spine. I really don't like Mourinho, to be honest. I can't get past what some of the things that he said to Wenger, some of the things he said about Arsenal for one, and that's not even looking at the fact of the way he plays. I think he's quite a negative coach in regards to towards the end of his career. I would say obviously the Chelsea team and some of the Porto and Real Madrid teams played good football at times, but I think we can all agree overall Mourinho is quite a negative coach. I think that he brings a toxicity that I don't think will help Arsenal, and I don't think would help the fan base either. I think that it's shown and it's proven that he may have a good first year, a better second year, and then in the third year it's going to implode. And most teams end up being in a worse position than when he got there in regards to when he's left. He may win something along the way, but I just think it's really important as Arsenal fans that we don't get so desperate to, I don't know, quote unquote, win something or quote unquote be back in a place where we were, that we don't completely lose our identity and almost sell our soul to get someone that ultimately may put us in a worse position than we were in the first place. So I just think that he just doesn't, I don't think he aligns with the ideals and aligns with the philosophy of Arsenal.
I was listening to if you don't listen to it, you definitely should, the Galazzo podcast that is run by Muddy Knees Media, and it was with James Richardson and James Horncastle and a person who's been on the show as well, Gabriel Marcotti, and they were talking about Mourinho's years at Inter and just the way he won that double legger against Barcelona. That in itself is, whilst they won that leg and that tie, it's just that style that I just don't want to see at Arsenal whatsoever. One more run through of you guys, and then we'll wrap things up. Graham, this question comes in from Lee Farrell, long-time listener of the show. He says, question, is Lacazette overrated since he has been at Arsenal? He hasn't scored over 14 Premier League goals in any season he's been here.
Well, I think the reason for that is he's had injuries, and also he plays in the system that he's asked to play. He's not always played as an out-and-out striker. No, I don't think he's overrated. I think he doesn't play away from home as well as he does at home. I think he's struggling this year again, coming back from an injury. I think his injuries is the reason for that. Is the straight answer. I don't think he's overrated. I think he's a quality player who, with the right service, is going to score goals. And I just think we're not giving him the right service.
Drew Salavi says, what are the board waiting to see that would make them realise Emery is not the right manager?
I don't think we just had this talk on WhatsApp before. I don't think it's that they're waiting to see something. I think it's that they're doing their due diligence on trying to avoid making the instability even worse. So I put into the chat that if we were to sack Emery in the wake of the Leicester result and just say Freddie comes in as caretaker, say Freddie, whether he finishes out the year or not, but you'd be hard to find anybody who thinks rationally that could say Freddie deserves being the head coach. He has zero head coach experience at the top level, in the Premier League or anywhere. He's always been an assistant, right? So it's a big job, it's a big task. So then say, for example, you go out and get an actual manager. So now you've had 3 managers in the space of 6 months, and there's a very good chance that all 3 of them could have different footballing philosophies, try to instill something different that doesn't really instill itself well on players who are constantly having some sort of chopping and changing of the things that they need to progress with in terms of, tactics and their roles in the team and their responsibilities. That's not, I don't think that Josh and the board want to have the possibility of that is really bad. Also, there's no guarantee that getting rid of Emery now actually fixes anything. They could sack Emery tomorrow. They could go with Freddie, or they could go with Arteta, or they could go with Rafa Benitez or Mourinho, and things should also get worse. So I don't think they see it as, for me, and Webby agreed in the chat, that I think this is the board saying we're giving Emery until the end of the season and then he's done. I think they're taking from this time until May to really do their due diligence on making sure that they get the next appointment right, because they're trying to avoid what happened with the United, and they alluded to that in their statement. They don't want to have the managerial merry-go-round. They don't want to have someone come in for a year and a half, then another one in for 1 season, and one for another 6 months. They want to make sure that if Emery doesn't work, the next one has to work, or else, the black hole will get worse.
Tom,
yes, Grant.
Tom, there's a very simple answer to that question. What are the board waiting to see? What did
the suspense?
Graham, we've lost you, mate. It's a very simple answer, but we can't hear it. Are you there, mate? No, he's not. Raph, I'm gonna move on to you because I don't know what's happened to Graham. Last question. Tayyib says, Graham, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back. Did you get that? Basically, empty seats. Empty seats, mate.
Oh, okay.
Empty seats at the stadium would do for Emery. That's what I think.
Yeah, for sure. Last one, Raph. Tayyib says, who, you get the big one, is the best candidate to take Arsenal Football Club forward?
Tread softly, Raph.
Drew, from the sounds of things. No, I'm just.
You win points. Good job.
I think it's a tough one. I mean, I like Ten Hag personally. I think that I like what I've seen in regards to how he's been able to improve.
Did you not hear Drew say tread carefully?
Complete disregard.
Personally, but I think probably if he can, obviously, if he has his personal, if he can kind of sort out these personal issues, and obviously he's gone through quite a turbulent time, but I do like the idea of Luis Enrique. I think that he has the pedigree. I think he's playing style. A lot of people look at Barcelona and even Spain to a degree. When he came in, although that they had, an excellent front three and that he actually did change things, they were a little bit more direct. There were times in games when he was able to play counter-attack. And I remember a game against Bayern Munich when he played against Pep. And he kind of adapted the way he played and he allowed Bayern Munich to have more possession. And he picked them off on the break. And it was very good tactically. I think that he'd play exciting football, attacking football. And I think that, again, he would play to the strengths that we have. I think the reality is, unless we buy two centre-backs, a defensive midfielder who's dynamic, I think it was similar to what Graham was saying in regards to being able to actually somebody that's actually has power and dynamism within the midfield that allows someone that can win the ball back, but also drive the ball forward and play. And I think that if you can get those things in place, it will allow someone to actually be to do their job in an effective way. And I think that he would be able to get the best out of the players that we have while taking us to the next level. So I would say Luis Enrique. Ten Hag will be like the wild card-ish, but Luis Enrique is probably the safest pair of hands.
Yeah. Is Allegri out the running?
The thing is with Allegri, again, I like Allegri, but I think again he has a good balance, but I just think he can be a bit defensive as well. So it just depends on how we would be able to integrate with the players that we have and actually get us playing in a way that will be winning football. And he's always had the best team. Yeah,
that's true. Very quickly, Ariane, thank you for the donation. Drew, I want you to respond.
I was waiting. I saw it. I was like, please give me the question.
Ariane says, Drew, you say that, but had Hoffenheim not hired an unknown 28-year-old manager, they would have been relegated. It's not that sacking Unai Emery is the answer. It's that Unai Emery is not the answer.
I never said that we shouldn't sack Unai. I didn't say that. I said I think that's what the board are trying to consider. Also, because you're talking about Nagelsmann, the difference between Nagelsmann and Freddie is that Nagelsmann had a very, very, very proper footballing education in terms of his managerial credentials. Mm-hmm. He had the practical experience applied to it in various clubs with various different systems that he's tried to instill. He also had the eye of Pep and Bayern. They wanted to bring him in onto Bayern's staff before he even went to Hoffenheim. So I think you're comparing apples and oranges with that one. It doesn't mean I don't think Freddie isn't capable of developing into a first-team manager. I don't think he's there, and I certainly don't think that Arsenal should be his first port of call. It doesn't mean I don't think he can do it later down the road. I just don't think now's the
time. Last thing before I wrap up is not to do with Arsenal specifically, but Drew, I've got a question for you. We started off the show talking about in jest the David Abraham thing that happened because it was quite amusing. But something that wasn't so amusing that happened this weekend was something that I want to talk to you about because I know myself and you have plenty of chats about this and you tweet about it a lot, but it was something that happened in the Shakhtar Donetsk game. what happened to Tyson in the game, booted the ball into the crowd, was sent off because he was being racially abused. Now, this is an Arsenal podcast, but as it's a podcast, I like to talk about certain things that happen in the game, especially when they're as important as this. And I know that you feel very strongly about this, and I want to give you the opportunity to sort of have your say on what happened. So go for it, mate.
I mean, everyone kind of knows like what happened. It's the standard nonsense, you know. In certain parts of Europe in particular, because that's what we're discussing, racism in the grounds is very, very prevalent, more so than most. You know, we get the odd instance in the Premier League and maybe the Championship, but when you go to places like, you know, Italy, Croatia, Serbia, Ukraine, it's another animal. It's constant. You know, from first minute to 90, players are berated with racial abuse, and as someone who's dealt with racial abuse before, as a player, as a manager, as a human walking down the street, you know, it's taxing on you. You know, it's like, for example, like, so Tom, if you went to your place of employment, if you went to school and just for no reason at all, a parent walked up to you and just said something racially insensitive about it, you'd be expected to just get that kind of kick in and carry on and say, you know what, I'll report it to my boss, I'll make note of it, and I'll kind of have to go about my day. Yeah. So, but it's different when there's thousands of people doing it at once, and it happens week in, week out. And eventually, it's really hard to just say, oh, well, he can just have a brush off his back. He just has to go on with it and deal with it. And that's also kind of why I didn't agree with it, why I understand why Xhaka reacted the way he did. He didn't deal with racist abuse, but he did deal with a scenario where it may have just got too much for him from a mental and emotional standpoint, and he lashed out about it. Yeah. Racism is something I never condone, obviously, and I'm in a tricky spot because I'm multiracial. So I get it from both sides, which is great. So it's just like you and for him to get sent off for kicking the ball into the crowd, it's almost just kind of like at that point, you're almost fueling the racists to say, well, if we keep doing this, opposition players are still going to keep sending off, and then it helps our team. So let's keep on about it. And then you look at the Italian FA, where Balotelli's own ultras supported Verona's ultras in the issue. And it's just like at that point, you know, there is such a systemic issue with racism, and not just in sport and football, but everywhere, that people still find a way to condone it or to excuse it or to fuel the fire and let it continue. For me, that is incredibly fucking frustrating. I'm sorry for the F-bomb, but my hair stands up on end when I deal with stuff like this and when I talk about it. It's incredibly infuriating to see that people just can't just let it go. Yeah. You know? No. So, yeah.
100%, mate. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to
I appreciate that.
That is going to round off the show. I really, really appreciate everything that's going on in the chat, as there's some really, really good comments about it. If you want to tweet myself, Drew, or whoever about it, feel free. We're always happy to talk about this sort of stuff. And, of course, a big thank you to our brilliant panel. Raph, fantastic debut, mate. It's some really, really good stuff spoken.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for having me.
No worries. You can find him on Twitter at, is it Mess the Message? I believe it is. Yes, right, that way?
Mess the Artist. It's
Mess the Artist, that's it.
TheArtist.
There you go. It's on the Twitter account anyway, at the Gooner Talk TV. Already tweeted out, so please go and give Raph a follow. Graham, always a pleasure, pal, to get your tactical insights.
Yeah, many thanks, Tom. A pleasure, and great to meet Raph, and nice to meet up with Drew again. Really enjoyed the Gooner Talk. You've got a good thing going here, mate. Keep it going.
Cheers, pal. And finally, Drew, massive pleasure as always. Even when you're, a few coffees down, it's not bad, is it?
I tried my best today. I tried to be a little bit more upbeat, but it was a real struggle. So,
It is. Hopefully things will pick up. Last couple of things is obviously massive thank you everyone who's been following the Twitter at the Gooner Talk TV. We hit 15,000 followers, which is amazing. Really, really appreciate that. Things are going forward nearly at 16,000 subscribers. So if you're enjoying things on here, please make sure you hit that subscribe button and like the video as well. 2 shows that are going to be coming up for you tomorrow, 9 o'clock. I'm going to be having a chat live as a live tactical breakdown with Mr. John Driscoll, former Sky Sports commentator on La Liga football, to talk about Luis Enrique and his reactions to Emery as well. So make sure you turn those notifications to tune in for that. And then on Tuesday, I'm going to be chatting to Tom from the Other Bundesliga podcast, where we're going to be talking about a Mr. Marco Rose as a possible replacement for Unai Emery, which I saw from Ben Parfitt in the chat said that it was his choice. So I know Ben will be tuning in to get all the ins and outs inside about Marco Rose, who is definitely someone that I am hedging my bets on, hopefully, fingers crossed, praying that maybe he takes over in the summer, but it's going to be a tough ask. I really appreciate everything. that you've been saying in the chat box. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Really appreciate everything, and the boys as well. I will see you again very, very soon. Try and stay positive. I know it's tough. International break. Take a break. Enjoy the international football if that's a possible thing to do. And I'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.